You want to buy an airport. Find land, build a runway, let planes land, collect fees. It's the closest thing the modern world has to a toll booth. One road in, one road out, everyone who uses it pays you. No competition. Nobody builds a second airport next to yours. You sit back, watch the planes arrive, and let the money come in. That's the dream. And it's not entirely wrong. The problem is what happens between the dream and the reality. What it costs to get in. What it costs just to keep the lights on. What happens when the world stops flying. And why the smartest infrastructure investors on the planet still lose spectacular amounts of money on airports that by every reasonable measure should have worked. First question. Who actually sells airports? For most of history, governments built and owned them. But starting in the 1980s, governments realized they sat on enormously valuable assets, and private investors realized a monopoly with guaranteed traffic was exactly the thing you want to own for 50 years. A wave of privatization swept across more than 90 countries. Today, over 850 airports worldwide have private investment. In Europe, 76% of passenger traffic moves through privately owned airports. In Latin America, 78%. The United States is the opposite. American airports are still owned by cities and states. The only major commercial airport fully privatized under the federal program is in San Juan, Puerto Rico. JFK, LAX, O'Hare, Atlanta all publicly owned. U.S. airports are funded through tax-exempt bonds private buyers can't access, making privatization economics unusually difficult there. Governments sell airports three ways: outright sale, a long-term concession, or a public stock offering. The concession model is most popular because it raises money without fully surrendering the asset. In 2002, Australia leased Sydney Airport for 99 years. 20 years later, a consortium of superannuation funds acquired full control for about 32 billion Australian dollars, the largest infrastructure takeover in Australian history. And the buyers considered it a reasonable price. Here's why. When investors value an airport, they compare the purchase price against EBITDA. A healthy airport sells for 15 to 23 times its annual EBITDA. The Sydney deal happened during a pandemic when travel had collapsed. Buyers weren't paying for what the airport earned in 2022. They were paying for what they expected it to earn over the next several decades. That's the core logic. You're not buying today's earnings. You're buying a monopoly position in a city permanently for as long as air travel exists. What if you can't buy an existing airport? What if you want to build one? First, you need land. A modern international airport needs 50 to 140 square kilometers of flat, legally cleared territory. Denver International covers 137 square kilometers, bigger than San Francisco. Acquiring that land, clearing title, compensating everyone displaced costs hundreds of millions before a single foundation is poured. Then come the runways. A runway isn't a road. It's a multi-layered engineered structure built to withstand a 400-ton aircraft landing at high speed, repeated tens of thousands of times a year for a century. Building a single major runway costs over $1 billion in most developed countries. When Heathrow proposed a third runway, the estimate was $13 to $18 billion for one runway at a site where infrastructure already exists. When Gatwick Airport was sold in 2009 for $1.5 billion, a decade later its proposed new runway alone was estimated at $10 to $13 billion, roughly 8 times the purchase price. Then there are the terminals, not buildings, small cities. Baggage systems moving thousands of bags through underground conveyors. Air conditioning processing millions of cubic meters per hour. Security lanes meeting government explosive detection standards. Jet bridges calibrated to dozens of aircraft door heights. Backup power for every critical system, all running 24 hours a day, every day of the year. Beijing Daxing opened in 2019 at a cost of about $17 billion. Istanbul's new airport cost around $12 billion for the first phase alone. Even then, you're not done. Environmental assessments, community consultations, regulatory sign-offs, legal challenges routinely add years and hundreds of millions before a single plane lands. Here is the trap that destroys airport projects more reliably than anything else. When you borrow money to build an airport and you always borrow money, you start paying interest the day the loan arrives, not the day the airport opens. Every month of construction delay is a month paying interest on billions with zero revenue. Berlin-Brandenburg Airport was supposed to open in October 2011. It opened in October 2020, 9 years late. Original budget, $2 billion. Final cost, $7 billion. It opened during a global pandemic when air travel had collapsed. The cause? The fire safety system didn't work. Automated smoke extraction had been integrated too late. Tests failed. Every flaw meant redesigns. Cables lacked documentation, escalators were wrong, doors malfunctioned, roofs leaked. None catastrophic alone. Together, they cost $4 billion and 9 years. Denver International suffered similarly in the 1990s, opening 16 months late largely because of a $200 million automated baggage system that destroyed luggage during testing. The airport cost $4.8 billion total. The delay cost approximately $1 million per day in interest and operating expenses every day the airport sat empty. Once open, money comes from two categories. First, aeronautical revenue, fees charged to airlines. Landing fees based on weight, per passenger charges, aircraft parking fees. At Heathrow, a wide-body landing costs the airline about $9,000. Each departing passenger generates roughly $55. Sound good? It is. But governments impose strict limits. Airports are monopolies. Without regulation, Heathrow could charge whatever it liked. So regulators set caps. In the UK, the Civil Aviation Authority reviews charges every 5 years. For 2022-2026, Heathrow's allowed charge was cut to $21.03 per passenger, nearly 20% below the prior period. The airport disputed it. The regulator said it was profitable enough. The legal fight dragged on. That's the structural reality. The government tells you how much you can charge, and the answer is always less than you want. Because aeronautical revenue is tightly regulated, every major privatized airport has built a second business inside the first one, a business regulators can't cap, that grows faster than passenger numbers and generates margins airlines can only dream about. That business is everything that is not the runway. Globally, non-aeronautical revenue accounts for about 37% of total airport income, in Europe and Asia sometimes over 40%. And it's growing faster. The single biggest source in the US is parking, accounting for 46% of commercial revenue. Dallas/Fort Worth generated $251 million from parking in 2024, lakhs $181 million. Premium covered parking at major hubs can cost $100 per day and no regulator is watching. The retail model works through the minimum annual guarantee. A tenant pays either a fixed percentage of gross sales or a predetermined minimum, whichever is higher. The airport's income is protected on the downside. A bad year for the perfume shop still yields the minimum. A great year for duty-free means the airport takes its cut of every sale. Terminal architecture is designed to maximize time in front of shops. After the stressful security checkpoint, designers introduce a recomposure zone, lower ceilings, softer lighting, wider corridors. The signal, relax, which means spend money. Many duty-free zones have no direct path from security to gates. You must walk through retail. This forced walkthrough increases sales by up to 60%. And because most people are right-handed and pull luggage with their right hand, they naturally drift and look right. So walkways often curve left, keeping your eyes on high-margin merchandise on the right. All this revenue looks good on paper. The reason airport investing isn't a guaranteed fortune is what you have to spend. Start with security. Every passenger and bag must be screened with 3D X-ray machines, explosive trace detection, body scanners. When standards upgrade, you upgrade. About 41% of airports report significant financial pressure from mandated security tech upgrades alone. The baggage system runs entirely underground, kilometers of conveyors drawing enormous power. needing constant maintenance. When it fails, the airport stops. Utilities at scale are staggering. A large terminal has more floor space than several city blocks of office buildings running 24/7. Emergency generators must power every critical system. Firefighting vehicles must be staffed at all times, even at 3 a.m. for a single delayed cargo flight. And northern airports need specialized plows, sweepers, dikers, costing millions on standby. A runway closed for 2 hours costs revenue and reputation. None of this changes based on how busy you are. The lights stay on, security stays open, the runway gets plowed. The only thing that changes with volume is your revenue. Then early 2020 happened. In April, 66% of the world's commercial aircraft were grounded. Passenger revenues fell $418 billion, a 69% decline. For airports, it was catastrophic. The runway didn't close, the baggage system didn't stop, bond payments came due, insurance premiums remained. Airports went from generating hundreds of millions to almost nothing while costs stayed intact. Concessionaires with minimum guarantees couldn't pay. Forcing them to honor the minimums would bankrupt them, leaving empty storefronts that damaged the commercial model for years. Smarter airports suspended guarantees, shifting to pure percentage of sales, destroying short-term income but preserving the retail ecosystem. The airports that survived best did something unexpected. They converted terminals into cargo hubs. With passenger flights grounded, cargo smartphones, pharmaceuticals, fresh food had nowhere to go. Airports opened gates to freight, used empty aprons for staging, loaded cargo into empty passenger cabins. Not elegant, but it kept revenue alive. Not all airports face this problem because not all have large volumes to lose. An airport handling under 1 million passengers per year almost always loses money. Not enough passengers to generate the spending needed to cover a building open 24/7. Governments fund these losses for political reasons, rural connectivity, regional development. A more interesting problem is when a small airport tries to attract passengers without government support. The answer is almost always dependence on a single budget airline. Carriers like Ryanair have built a model around exploiting this. When a regional airport needs passengers, Ryanair arrives with a proposal. Landing fees cut 50%, marketing payments worth millions per year, described as tourism contributions but functioning as direct subsidies. The airport has no choice. Without Ryanair, empty gates. With Ryanair, some revenue, most flowing back to the airline. If the airport refuses demands for lower fees, the airline threatens to relocate. Overnight, the terminal goes from busy to empty.